Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good, and there's not a lot of background noise or anything?
No, you sound good.
Okay, great.
You sound like an angel descended unto heaven to inform me and the over 1,000 people watching how we're all going to die.
Well, there's both good news and bad news, and involves a lot of math, but I can sort of explain it, the Cliff Notes version of the approximations that are used to generally build the models and what theoretically you could do to change it, and then what is practically most likely to happen.
Hit me up. I want to know. Also, remember, you're not just talking to me.
Yes.
Basically a PhD scientist myself, You're also talking to a legion of horny dipshits. So we got to go through this point by point, point by point. We got to go through it. We're gonna hit those big talking points people are interested in hearing. Should they give up plastic straws? Is the only ethical form of consumption drinking from the toilet water so you don't waste the potable water? All the stuff that concerns all of us. Where do you want to start? In fact, why don't you introduce us with your credentials?
All right. Well, yeah, sure. I'll say my name. That's not a problem. I'm not going to give any spicy takes that would upset any university people. I'm just basically saying what the physics and other people say when it's in PhD classes, which are less than 10 people in a room.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing, nothing controversial there. My name's Aspen Glaspell, and basically, I'm a PhD in material science, but my background is extremely heavy in thermodynamics. So I generally understand the models and what they're doing, sort of to get to those numbers. Uh, I have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering, a master's in mechanical engineering, and I'm about almost halfway through my PhD in material science. Material science is basically mechanical engineering plus aspects of chemistry and physics, sometimes involving quantum mechanics if you want to do stuff with uh, transistors or mostly anything electronic.
I see. So you and I actually have the same number of PhDs.
Yes, yeah, um, yes. All right, and I guess I'll start with sort of a general idea of what they do when they say these temperature, the average temperature increase. What they're doing is they're technically, for all the flat earthers out there, the Earth is bulges on two different sides of its axis usually. So if you wanted to be the ultimate enlightened scientist, you would say it's a ellipsoid
Obloid,
or
yes,
whatever.
sphere, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
whatever, however you would pronounce
You're
it. Yeah.
actually. I think we're actually going to have to start way the fuck back. I think you're assuming too much from my audience. Let me
Okay.
hold,
All right.
let me give
Yeah.
a
You
very
start.
brief intro. Okay, really quickly. So to those of you who don't know, the planet is getting warmer. And the reason the planet is not all the entire planet at the same time, it's complicated, and the way heat and wind transfers thermal energy across the planet means that some areas will get colder, but then they'll get hotter, blah blah. But generally speaking, things are getting hotter. And the reason for that is because when the light from the sun and all the radioactive energy that comes along with it, or the radiation or whatever, the spooky invisible beams, hits the planet, it warms us up, but then the heat leaves the planet through a variety of physical processes. But when we have a bunch of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it traps the heat inside of the planet because it further insulates us, making it easier for heat to remain, meaning that we slowly warm up. That's why it's called a greenhouse gas, because it turns the planet into a greenhouse. That's what greenhouses do. That's the point. They trap the CO2 inside the little glass box and it helps the plants grow. And we're all going to die. All right. Now that the audience is aware, please.
All right. So basically, climate is there. I forget the name for the mathematical model, but you can pretty accurately describe it using temperature and a couple other parameters. And parameters are basically variables, so X, Y, Z. But for spooky big brain variables, not space dimensions. Um, but essentially, they pick some distance from the sea level, so that's kind of how we gauge height, altitude, and they approximate the average temperature on a grid for the Earth. And what they've always been saying is the average temperature increase. The reason they say it that way is because even before we started having the Industrial Revolution, where we actually released large amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases, technically speaking, we've never really been far from that temperature anyway. The temperature at which you start to have really bad effects, and a little bit further than that, you go into a possible feedback loop, which we'll get into a little bit later.
So you're saying that for pretty much the entirety of human history, we've never actually been that far away from a catastrophic climate sort of comeuppance. It didn't take much to tip the scale.
Well, they always say, well, they're saying right now, more or less, if it goes above a change of 5 degrees Celsius or something around that area, less than 10 degrees Celsius increase. And we've already increased, say, I forget the exact number. Let's just say it's 5 degrees Celsius. We've already increased 2 degrees Celsius. So if we assume everything happens when we get to that 5 degree increase from now, that means at the beginning we were only 7 degrees Celsius away from it to start with. But the reason they don't say it like that is because that's alarming people, and the math gets complicated. I mean, I've taken all the calculuses, differential equations, probability statistics. So I have all the background to understand what they're saying. And also, there's generally in the scientific and community, they have a more pessimistic view of intelligence, and some of them do believe the common man can understand. Some of them view it more so as their moral responsibility to basically guide the Neanderthals into doing the right thing.
Well, the issue isn't the general person's understanding. The issue is that there's a multi-billion-dollar propaganda campaign. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's
It's
not
not
the
like
general.
people are incapable of understanding any of this.
Yeah, I'm just saying sort of why some of the scientific community don't word it that way. So I would just go with I'll start with labeling some. This is sort of a little bit of an outdated chart that I'm going to kind of read the data points from, if I can find it real quick. I don't have it with me, but I'll just sort of start with one of the two favorites that everyone wants to bring up, which is renewable wind energy.
Aye.
All right. The wind energy has a well-known calculated theoretical maximum. It's not too bad. It's almost rounding the whole numbers. It's the best you could get would be 59% efficiency, due to the fact that if you were to get 100% efficiency, what that would physically mean is you have a turbine where wind goes in, but then wind stops as soon as it goes on the other side. It just stays still. You can't physically do that. You can't extract all the energy out of the fluid.
Right.
And then the other one that everyone wants to bring up is solar. And solar is interesting because photons are technically also governed by quantum mechanics under different scenarios. But generally speaking, there's a hard cap around soft cap around 60% efficiency, but a lot of that depends on the intensity of the light, which is generally very low because a lot of that intensity is blocked by the atmosphere, even without carbon emissions.
So, do you believe that either of these are like feasible solutions in the immediate sense? Do you believe it's possible to invest in these industries and and make them like adequate replacements for the systems we have for energy production right now?
You can, but you need something to do base load power usage, and these would be the ones that you would use to lessen the need for a base load energy. So you could.
Just warning you, you're using a lot of terms that I don't know, which means I know the
I'm sorry.
audience doesn't know, generally speaking, either.
Okay. All
In a
right.
very
So
at
I
a
worded
very
this.
base level, it's all right. We're stepping out of academia for a little bit. At a
Okay.
very
Okay.
base level, we are we understand. I think at least most of us that this is pretty fucking bad, and we get a lot of
Yeah.
conflicting information about the severity and potential solutions to the problems that we're currently facing.
Okay.
Um,
I see. Yeah.
yeah. So if you're familiar with the models that are associated not only with climate change but whatever solutions might be imposed to fix the problems associated with climate change, we're wondering like
Okay. I
how could
got
these
you.
be implemented? Like how would
All right. All right.
what's the
I,
likelihood?
I got you. Okay, so what you need to do, you need a power source that can be that you can completely control the output of energy from. So you need something that is a non-carbon emitting version of, say, a coal power plant or a natural gas power plant. Basically, that leaves you two options. You either have to use nuclear power, just based on the current limitations of solar and wind cannot do it alone, mostly because the wind doesn't blow all the time, and now, while that is a right-wing talking point, the problem is the turbines won't spin unless there's a minimum velocity of wind. If the wind moves too slow, the turbine produces zero energy.
It doesn't get over
And
the friction necessary to get the blades
yeah,
moving in the first place.
there is a fancier version of a wind turbine, something called a vertical axis wind turbine. Looks kind of like a thread, like a screw thread or a drill bit thread standing up.
Aye.
That one requires a far lower wind speed, but you get far lower energy out of it too. Um,
Do you think there's
so
any potential use whatsoever for wind
yeah,
turbines?
yes, there is usefulness for them. The usefulness, essentially, with our current level of technology, they're useful in the fact that you need fewer nuclear power plants to compensate for zero coal and zero natural gas and zero. I don't even think we ever used oil plants, but zero of those. None of
Right.
them. Save them. Save those. Save all that good, precious dinosaur goo because we need it until we figure out a way to fully make artificial plastic. They're more needed for that than they are for energy at this point.
Yeah, so wait, that's one of the questions I have. Okay, so so from my understanding, if the world collectively decided this was worth our time and energy, if we pooled together our resources, it would be possible hypothetically to within perhaps a decade more or less completely replace our energy systems. It would be extremely expensive. It would be overwhelmingly so, but it would nonetheless be possible. And at
Yes.
that point, it's mostly a problem of political efficacy. But I do know that plastic is basically like the building brick of modern society, and it's produced with petroleum. Is there, given the current production of plastic that we rely upon, are we like, is it possible for us to continue to use petroleum and oil and what have you in a non-harmful context to produce that, or do we need to switch to an alternative means of producing plastic?
Research is being done to make the alternative possible. Right now, the alternatives are few, and they're not really at the level where you would want to, say, give your baby a bottle made out of stuff. Not
Hmm.
necessarily because it's dangerous, but just because it's very expensive and, excuse me, they're going through a bunch of testing phases to make the stuff readily available. Like 90% of the plastics that are petroleum based, of all the petroleum based plastics, we've been able to sort of figure out, like, say, 10% to be through some complicated chemistry process. We make it without any petroleum necessary. So we need them for that right now. The I don't see honestly any way of doing this sort of big overhaul of power of energy production without some way of saying basically the government makes the energy. You can't allow any sort of profit motive or even personal motive to do it. It
Yeah,
has to be.
I didn't even
It has.
ask you if you were a
Yeah.
socialist.
No, I'm pretty. I'm like a strong Bernie Sanders supporter. I lean a little bit. I like democracy. I like democracy. I like also some parts of capitalism. I think you can probably rein capitalism in to be very nice, but I don't know. The important thing is as far as energy production, uh, capitalism's only purpose there really is for R&D, but even then, most of that comes out of universities and other things anyway. So that's not even basically all you need is money to give scientists so that they have money to spend on equipment to research. That's all. There is no. Also, you're never going to be able to for a country the size of America, which takes up most of the habitable zones of North America, if you ignore everything about below Mexico. I know there's countries below that,
No, there
but
are.
that are above that are above South America. I don't know their names, and I
No
know a
one does. Don't worry.
large portion of Canada isn't habitable because even though climate change is happening, most of Canada is still technically tundra, too cold to live in. So your first issue comes with most of the continent is United States of America, and a lot of that is empty land. But you need electricity to go to all the cities and areas, and no one's willing to relocate into basically certain pockets of it and just live there. No one's willing to do that politically and probably socially as well. So what you need is basically almost a planned economy of this region needs so much projected energy and kilowatt hours or kilowatts, however you want to measure it. And these are the natural renewable resources in that area. So we only need this much of nuclear. And also, this grid must be able to connect to the grid of all the other states around it, and so on and so forth, for it to be a connected grid.
So you're saying that because okay, so for the longest time, like right now, cities exist where it's profitable for cities to exist.
Yes.
Like Los Angeles, for example, that's the city I grew up in. Los Angeles was literally reclaimed from the desert. If Los Angeles was returned to the earth as it was 300 years ago, it would be an unlivable wasteland. There are worse places too. Las Vegas, Phoenix, Arizona. These places are literally inhospitable to human life. It is only through the fastidious, urban development of big brain boys such as yourself, in fact, that why is Antarctica not white? Good point. That we've been able to claim these parts of the world, but we do so at enormous costs. The fact that we have to pipe in water, the amount of electricity that goes to AC, wildfires, like that sort of stuff. What you're talking about essentially is returning to an earlier model of city planning and development, one that takes into account like the very concept of sustainability.
If you're going to do it within the time the planet has left, you would have to. So what they also say, okay, this is going to be a little technical,
We're ready.
but I'm
We're
going to
learning.
say it as basic as I can. If you open up Google, or if you want to shill for those Microsoft points for free Xbox gift cards, use Bing. That's what I do. What you're going to type is, or what you would type if you had free time is limit cycle differential equation, and you'll see some examples of something. And usually they draw it as a circle. It doesn't have to be a circle. It could be any weird geometric shape. And basically, there are two sort of variations of a limit cycle. On the inside of the limit cycle, there's a spiral, and on the outside, it spirals. But there's a line or a curve in which, if you're exactly on that curve, you never move off of it. You just go around and around forever.
So this is a mathematical model which can be used to describe system which, if left in equilibrium, continues to function as intended forever, but if disturbed in either direction will spiral out into unviability.
if you start exactly on the line.
Right.
Typically, you'll exist somewhere in either inside or outside the curve, and you'll move one or the other depending on a mathematical term called an eigenvalue. If it's positive, negative, if it is complex, which is a real number plus or minus a real number times the imaginary number I.
You've lost everyone. Everyone who's
I know,
watching right now is lost.
But there's no other way to explain what it means without saying that. Here's the point. Technically, I would argue the Earth does not exactly follow a limit cycle. It follows something that is close to it. I'm not going to try to explain what it is. It's going to sound too weird and have too many words people would have to Google. What it means is this, though. Inside of that thing that looks like a limit cycle, if you're been inside the curve and if you just wait for very long periods of time, you'll go back to the critical point, which let's just say, imagine it's centered around 0, 0x, 0y. If you wait for long periods of time, say in the time span of hundreds or thousands of years, you'll go back to that stable point and you'll stay there forever.
Well, that's not of much comfort to us right now.
If you're outside that limit cycle, mathematically speaking, you would go to plus or minus infinity. What that means for a complex system of planetary climate is if the carbon feedback loop occurs, which is basically chemistry. So the plants absorb and release so much carbon in whatever form, dioxide, whatever. The algae does, the animals do, the soil does, so on and so forth. If that enters a feedback loop, you'll go, well, we're not going to go negative, so we're going to go up to a temperature until we reach an equilibrium point. We're not going to actually reach infinite degrees Celsius or anything. That doesn't exist.
No, but I mean, in a practical sense, we're only really concerned with climate change to the extent that it affects human beings. Once we go more than 10 degrees Celsius either directions, we're probably already facing an apocalyptic event anyway. It doesn't matter too much how far beyond it goes.
But there is good news. The good news is you can adjust the system so that it goes backwards, so that it goes back into the stable zone. And that basically, because it's not, the Earth isn't a true limit cycle in that respect, it takes a long time for it to become unstable and go away. Yeah. Even though I would argue we've already gone past that imaginary line where the circle would be. We're already out of that line. We're already on the unstable side. But it's going to do a bunch of loops around that before it shoots off, goes up.
Will we be dead before that system does its loops, or will we still be alive for that?
Well, how old are you? I'm 26 years old.
I'm 25 years old. Hey, I get one more year than you.
We'll be elderly men when it starts to get to the point where millions or billions die. But this is all assuming like they don't move. So I've looked up some of the math. So assuming that everyone within a certain distance from the ocean doesn't move from that spot, the people in the deserts don't move, and all the other areas that are obvious 100% guaranteed deaths, you lose about 1 out of every 2 people on the planet, because a lot of people live near water, and there's a good chunk of people who live in areas in the Middle East and other desert areas. Assuming none of them leave, they all just sit there for whatever reason, they all die. And then obviously there's other issues. So we have time to correct the problem. The likelihood of happening
that's with nothing being changed from current trends. Correct?
Yes, assuming the current trends go the way they are, no one does anything, and the people there don't try to do World War Z running over a wall to try to get to a safe zone.
Well, that's the
assuming they
main.
just
That's
sit there.
something that I've talked about a lot on my stream. The fact that climate change refugees are a near inevitable component of the systems that are like in place right now. That hundreds of thousands, millions of people are going to be trying to move towards colder places of the world from the equatorial regions, and it's going to cause a whole lot of political destabilization.
Yeah. Yep. So what the so what something I would suggest as an actual policy thing would be sort of maybe you don't have to relocate people, but you build enough nuclear power plant facilities so that you can have a lot of renewables that offset, so that together with nuclear and solar and wind and hydroelectric, which is Hoover Dam,
Yeah.
the Hoover Dam, uh, you can get away from fossil fuels, and then you can do work to try to collect some of the carbon that's been released, and then that'll save the planet, or at least save the human species until the sun goes supernova. But that's a long time. That's a long.
Which we're all. I think we're fine with that time scale.
Yeah, we're fine with that time scale.
How
But
much?
here's the thing.
How much would we have to deviate from current trends to expect us to be able to avoid like an apocalyptic event? Like a lot of people say we need to cut our carbon emissions down by 50% over the next decade. I've heard that a lot. Like what's an actual like expected, like what are we at? Like what are we looking at here?
Okay, so what you're looking at is different countries, mostly the ones that were third world when you and I were like literally babies, or before most of the Zoomers watching this were born. The China and other ones, not so much the African countries, but China and parts of India and other places like that, used to be pumping out a lot more carbon emissions than they were. Now their numbers increased, but that's because their population increased.
Mm-hmm.
But if you kind of control for population, to get to where they were, they had to pump out so much per every unit of time. Now they're slowing down because their population's getting older, and because they're investing in renewable technology, because in Bangladesh, India, you can't breathe the air without a gas mask or without a face filter. So now they're giving, every child gets like 2 a year, and if you don't do that, you lose 7 years off your lifespan, something like
Jesus
that.
Christ.
And that's I want to say near their capital. I saw it on Reuters TV, and I looked at it, and it seems pretty legit. So what happened is they are now trying to transition, and they have more of a incentive to transition because they don't want to all die. Now, the newer countries that are going into pumping a bunch of carbon out are now mostly African and maybe some Latin American countries. They were already kind of developed, but mostly Africa, because they were kind of, through unfortunate things that happened in the past, left behind from the technological advancement. And that's a long history in and of itself. But now they want to have cities that are powered with electricity. They don't want to have oil lamps. They want to have phones. They want to have internet. They want to have TVs, so on and so forth. And they don't have a lot of they don't have people there that have great knowledge in nuclear or other things. So they're turning to the easy availability of fossil fuels. I actually have a friend who is from, I want to say, Ghana or somewhere around there, and he's actually learning stuff with nuclear physics, and he plans on going back to his home country.
This is one of the things that a lot of lefties are concerned about. We're worried that as climate change becomes more and more of an inevitable like concern for humans, like there's no way to avoid it with propaganda, we're going to turn towards eco-fascism. That rather than working together to solve this problem, we're just going to blame like the brown people countries that are trying to do now what we were able to do prior to this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I already see that sort of happening a little bit. But basically, I guess back to. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit.
No
Back to
worries.
back to the what I was talking about, which is you need to have a large decrease in carbon emissions, but all you really need to have a high chance of survival is I guess, for lack of a better term, the major superpowers in the world all pushing for initiatives, or not pushing for initiative, literally deconstructing deconstructing coal plants, other plants, and making wind, solar, hydroelectric, nuclear facilities. And almost, I would say, so like almost threatening war with other countries if they don't. I would say like economic or however you would want to phrase it. Use all your soft and hard power as a country, as a almost de facto superpower to make others do it.
So you feel as
And
though
do it
force is,
yourself.
you feel force is our only way out of this.
Yes.
I don't necessarily fault you for that position. Generally speaking, I'm opposed to foreign intervention, imperialism,
Yes,
even
yeah.
if the conditions surrounding that imperialism are horrendously unfair. Like, for example, us being able to develop, but us not allowing other countries to develop because after they begin development, the global climate change crisis becomes unavoidable. But when it comes to choosing between being unfair to developing countries and the world ending, I will choose the former anytime.
Yeah.
Though it is unfortunate that it has to come to that.
Well, it doesn't have to be necessarily as violent as what everyone's thinking. You can give them energy resources, say as wind, solar. Even if you just gave them wind and solar, during most hours of the day, they would have a relatively stable electric grid. Let's assume they didn't have nuclear or some other thing to give a constant value of electricity. They would still have electricity for most of the day. It would be during night, if you looked at like a space view of that continent or country, it would be all black. But by that, if you did that, they would only have to use, say, gas power for some other or lighting sources during night hours.
What about what we can do to scale back energy consumption in the developed world?
Basically, you bribe them, give them money to make them complacent until, unfortunately, there's no other way to make this sound less bad. The advanced countries in the East and the West develop the technologies that no longer require dirty fuel. It's either that or some other form of coercion or force. You have to delay
Proletarian revolution.
That might work. I'm not sure about that. I know of another theoretical solution that would buy more time, but it's not necessarily nice.
What's that one?
So back with tracing back to the beginning, like I said, it's a function of average temperature of the planet, and also there's the carbon cycle, but you can kind of ignore that because that's sort of half the equation. But you can get away if you change the average temperature enough. So if you chose if you sort of mapped out the world and the air currents, the global currents, like high up in the stratosphere, whatever, I forget what its technical name is. If you find a certain number, I forget its exact value. I don't know its exact value, but let's say an area the size of Ohio.
Yeah.
And you nuked it a whole lot.
Yeah.
You would create a regional nuclear winter, and that would massively decrease the average temperature of the planet. Not enough to cause a global nuclear winter, but enough to put you back into the stable zone for a while so that you buy time to fix the solution permanently. Alternative to that doesn't involve nuclear radiation would be activating a volcano somehow and because all you're really doing is you're putting up a bunch of smoke into the air.
Right, which blocks the light from the sun.
Sunlight.
Yeah. Wait.
And that's
I'm really curious, actually, because I can't believe I hadn't considered this. Is there no way to like ethically or how do you say, like, stably introduce particulates into the atmosphere that would block out sunlight for a limited length of time? Is there no way for it? Can't we just be like, hey, here's $1 billion to this project, everyone go fucking throw confetti in the air, it'll deflect enough sunlight for a few years, keep us in the green? Is the scale
possible.
too great for humans to operate with on their own?
Individually, no, you need some sort of organization. You would need either some sort of machine or something that's constantly doing something like that. It has to also be something that isn't going to once released, become diffused or absorbed by some natural process.
Hmm.
Um, you could do it. I don't know the numbers for how that would work. I just said those two because they're the easiest examples of just making it happen, but unfortunately they're very kind of bad. I was
Yeah.
looking into the I was looking into the idea that if something did come to that, you would probably want to choose an area of the planet that doesn't have a lot of very valuable plant or animal life
You're
forms.
saying we should nuke
That would
Greenland?
I was thinking more Australia, the uninhabitable areas of it.
I'm okay with that. I hate Australia.
Like the areas where even humans don't live, because I was looking into it, and a lot of the natives of Australia lived around the coast areas because the inner areas are very hot and inhospitable.
Have you ever been to
So
Australia?
I've only exited the United States once, and that was because I was in a like a sort of a Boy Scout sort of thing where we were on a airplane and we just temporarily entered Canada for a couple seconds to come back.
Listen, the populated areas of Australia are also inhospitable to human life, okay? Let me
Yeah,
tell you, the world would not miss the absence of that continent. We,
yeah,
we can take everyone else out of there before the time comes, okay? We can make it all ethical and such.
yeah. But those are like doomsday sort of things. A more real. So going back to the policy thing I suggested with nuclear power,
Hmm.
I don't know why people don't think about this, but you only need you need somewhere to store the waste fuel, and not a lot of people know this, but there has been research done to make it so that you can reuse nuclear waste through a refining process to become a nuclear rod again. They're reusable like up to like so many uses
Yeah.
through this refining process. My idea would essentially be automated train systems so you don't have to worry about human contact with radiation to make the public feel safer. Because I have like older parents and they thought like 3 Mile Island and other things were super dangerous. When in reality, a lot of that boils down to the American way of just not updating infrastructure,
Well, yeah, I
basically.
mean that was also what happened with Chernobyl. It was the
Yeah,
system was horribly mismanaged. There were bureaucratic and infrastructural problems that contributed to the disaster. It's not like nuclear power is like this intrinsically dangerous thing. I mean, well, all forms of power generation are dangerous, but it's not more so than say coal.
yeah. So, um, yeah, so basically you have an automated system where you modify, say, a robot arm that they use for construction or factories. You modify one on a scale it up to a larger size, and then all it does is when object enters its range, it picks it up, puts it over to where the cart is, drops it, and then it just drives over. The train drives over to a mountain facility, and then it's just dumped in there. And then you do that every however often you need to do it.
What do you think what do you think the odds are of people actually coming together and developing a system capable of meaningfully addressing our climate change problems? Oh, like, what do you think the odds are of people actually working to fix this?
General people, very low. But so I'll give another example.
Not general people, but like the world
The
governments
world,
coming
the
together.
world, almost very little, like less than 10% chance, in my opinion. A lot of that comes from the fact that scientists, engineers, and other so on and so forth, um, they're working in more of a traditional, I guess, best way to phrase it would be sort of a capitalist way of doing it, where um, here's an example. Uh, rechargeable batteries. Everyone knows what those are, right?
Hmm.
Okay. Inside of those rechargeable batteries are generally lithium based acid or alloy solutions. Now, the problem with lithium is it ignites upon contact with oxygen. So, the reason they all have the warnings of being explosive is they're in a quote unquote pressurized container. And if you were to shove a If you were to like poke a hole and push oxygen into it, it would explode
Right.
or catch on fire. Now, there's a you so they're not useful for scaling up to the size of, say, shipping container sized batteries. Although there are batteries that are that large. They're very rare, and you'd have to look up weird names on internet to find them.
Well,
They're
right.
more for
I
industry.
imagine that would be some pretty high specialty stuff.
Yeah.
But what does that
So
have to do with the unviability of people finding a solution to this?
there is a metal that is non-flammable, non-toxic, that can do the same thing. Zinc. It is rechargeable. The problem is on a microscopic level. Uh, the normal shape of this zinc uh, liquid solution changes after being recharged a few times. Instead of being its normal shape, it becomes almost like a collection of pine needles. And for detailed reasons, that prevents electricity flow through it.
Yeah.
And there's been a little bit of research fixing that problem, but the people doing it are doing it very slowly. I heard talks from them. They're doing it, and they're doing it, normal scientifically, but it's really not getting much funding. And with it perfected, you could have batteries as big as you want to scale them up. So that's an example of it not being treated as much as a crisis as it should be.
What would the benefit be of having those infinitely scalable batteries? Like how does that fit into our ability to
Okay,
efficiently produce and direct energy?
you don't need nuclear at that point. You have multiple sets of batteries. So you have batteries set A and set B.
Hmm.
You fully charge both of them, and then you connect them to the electricity grid. And then you have renewable energy that's always recharging them. And then by having one at 100% at the beginning, you just alternate. One's always charging, one's always releasing energy. Then you don't need you get rid of the problem of requiring a stable amount because you just change how much electricity you're releasing from the battery.
What? Oh, wait. Okay, wait. Hold on. I'm super curious. Okay, how much of our potential problems with renewable energy as it exists now are a product of us simply not being able to produce enough energy, and how much of it is a product of us not being able to have that energy available when it's needed?
It's just about being available when it's needed. If it's
Is that
usually they say
true?
about you could just have different areas where you're having like if you had solar panels lining the desert, you could power all of America. The problem is it's not always light. There's not always light shining on the desert.
Okay, hold on.
Basically,
Let
is
me
the issue.
clarify something for chat really quickly. I'm having a brain blast right now. Okay, guys, are you fucking ready, my friends? We need to. Okay, guys, sorry. I'll hand the reins back
It's
to you
all
in
right.
just a moment. Okay, listen, my friends. We can ignore this. Okay. Okay, electricity production, right? Right now typically comes from coal burning, but you can get it from a lot of sources. What happens essentially is you burn coal, okay, and the burnt coal produces heat, and the heat and the steam and the whatever. Basically, turbines turn, you get electricity, okay? The problem is, while it is easy, comparatively speaking, to produce enormous amounts of electricity, given the vast swaths of technology available to us right now, storing that energy is much more difficult. When you fucking plug a toaster in and toast your toast, you plug it into an outlet, and the outlet are connected to power mains, and the power mains are connected to power lines, and those power lines are connected to a power facility, which generates electricity that you use. The problem is, it is constantly at all times producing that electricity. It's burning through it, always, always, always. So if, for example, a plant produces 1 million kilowatts of energy in a given day, but the power mains that it sustains only use half of that, half of the energy literally goes into nothing. It goes into the void. Because producing batteries capable of storing that energy is incredibly difficult. And that's what our beloved and esteemed professor here is talking about right now. The issue here isn't the literal raw amount of electricity being generated. The issue is that it needs to be available at all points in time because we can't store it for future use. So if we had infinite fucking super batteries, energy is in watt per hour. I'm not a scientist. I think my point is getting across. If we had batteries that were capable of storing limitless, or at the very least large amounts of electricity, the renewable energy sources would be much more sustainable because they would be able to feed the grid at all times. The batteries would be able to feed energy into the grid even when the turbines aren't turning, even when the sun isn't shining. That would make a huge difference. I had never even considered that. How much energy is wait, my friend, how much electricity is wasted every year just from people not using what the grid provides?
It's hard to say. Basically,
It must be a
when
fuckload, right?
it's probably about half or something like that. Whenever
Jesus.
all the voltage that everything that isn't being used at any point in time is uh, being wasted. Basically, there's very few places that actually store energy. There's two different groups. There's people trying to store it in batteries, people trying to store it in hydrogen fuel cells. Both research being done simultaneously. Both one guy ups the other guy ups the other. Well, mine's this much percent better, mine's this much percent better than yours, back and forth, back and forth. But neither of them are at the point of being scalable to basically what you would need, which is like basically, the size of old steel mills, right? You ever seen them? If you ever been around
Yeah,
the
I've been
Midwest
around
where I am,
the old factory districts in LA. They're enormous.
you need facilities like on that size to just hold these battery systems and just release energy from there. That's always the problem. Um, that's all the problem ever really was, uh, unfortunately.
Well, that's, I mean, that's, in a way, that's good, right? I mean,
It is good, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if nothing else, that means that there is a conceivable solution to sustainable energy production.
Yeah,
My
yes.
chat, I'm sorry, I'm terribly sorry. My chat is asking me to ask you about the viability of fusion energy. I obviously
Oh,
know nothing of
yes.
this.
I was talking with some buddies of mine in the physics department. Um, the reason nuclear fusion, this is going to sound funny to you all, but currently, with current methods of experiments of trying to do it, we have negative efficiency, which means that we have less energy coming out than comes in. And the reason for that is basically they use particles that are, I want to say they use just magnetic particles. So imagine a little like atom of iron,
Hmm.
let's say. All right. And then they put that thing in a superconductor or some sort of magnetic field. They get it going really, really, really fast. And they have another one. They get that one going really, really fast. Then they hit them together by directing the magnetic fields to intersect. You wasted a massive amount of energy getting them to go that fast and getting them to hit each other compared to the amount of energy you get when they fuse to become whatever iron fuses to be. I don't even know. The reason the sun can do it is because gravity does all the work. This is going to sound crazy to you as well, but the most energy efficient method of energy production is hydroelectric. It hovers usually around 90% efficiency. The reason for that is because gravity does all the work. You have the water going down a directed channel, and it goes down by force of gravity onto a turbine blade and spins it. The water can't go any other direction. It has to go down, and it has to go through the blade. So almost all the energy loss is due to the fact that you're converting mechanical energy into electrical energy. That's it. Problem is you have to flood an entire valley to do it. And the problem with fusion is unless you have gravity helping you, you have to figure out another way to get atoms to move so fast that the probability that they hit each other is not zero.
I mean, I don't know shit about fusion. There are probably some like nerdy techie dudes in my chat who are creaming their pants at the thought of it. It's always just been a fucking Star Trek word to me. I personally don't care. In terms of hydroelectric, though, it makes sense to me that it would be extremely efficient. I mean, it's literally the Earth is doing the work for you. The
Yeah.
processes, yeah, yeah. The rain pours up, upstream, pours down, river, such. That all makes sense to me. However, with the are there any? I know that dams cause problems with the potential for lithium batteries to sort of, not lithium, zinc batteries to efficiently store energy for long periods of time. If we just got that out of the way, do you know if it would be possible for there to be like super dams built across the earth that could conceivably like make a large share of the amount of the energy that we need?
That would be possible. You just have to scale it up. Um, Generally, from my understanding, is something like the Hoover Dam has multiple points where inside that big wall there's like a facility, and then in the facility there's like on the other side of the wall, which is underwater, there's an opening that can be opened or closed with a big valve. You open the valve so much or all the way, water goes in, it goes through a network of pipes to get to the network of pipes and filters to be so it's just raw water hitting it, no animal or sea life, whatever. And then it's into a sort of a funnel almost, and it just goes into the turbine. You're really not doing anything to it. You just have to make a channel where it goes through.
Gotcha.
So you can scale that as big or small as you want, as long as you have the gravitational potential energy.
What do you think is the most likely avenue by which we're going to pursue a solution to this problem? If we choose to do so. Like, do you think, for example, this zinc battery thing is going to take off, or is this a fun science experiment we can distract ourselves with as the end of the world looms over us?
Last time I was, the speaker was talking, who was actually the head researcher and owner of the company. Um, Basically, they're right now just trying to get the acid battery formula mix right, and this company doesn't actually have the skills to make batteries. So what they do is they just have a corrosion resistant container. They make the formula mix, pour it in, put electrodes plus or minus in so they can test the voltage. They're working with a battery company, but the battery company kind of wants to see results before they stop an assembly line and add another assembly line just to make test batteries for them to test.
Gotcha.
So that's like years away from any big breakthroughs, as are virtually all the things. Um, Solar efficiency has gone up quite a bit over time. Uh, Currently, the best you can get, according to this chart, for solar cell efficiency is 47.1%. Now, the good thing about that is you really don't have to do anything. You just set it there and let it happen.
Yeah, it just sort of does
Uh,
its own shit.
yeah, it does its own thing. The only downside is you can't really store it. You can't store the energy from a coal or any other sort of power plant. It just goes out into the ether. What I see happening most likely is um, I imagine that we're probably not, I hope that we don't go into the feedback loop. As long as we don't, what I see happening is climate getting progressively worse over time, and eventually you reach a point where it's just forced upon by whoever the elites are that control our individual societies around the world that, all right, we flip the switch, we do these things, and life for the average person becomes very hard for maybe one or two generations while basically the hand-picked science people spend their lives trying to come up with a more permanent solution. They keep the general populace living in lower quality life until that point.
If we do hit that feedback loop, is that it?
No, I expect I expect the major world powers to pick a spot and nuke it for regional or global nuclear winter, or expect them to activate a volcano like Mount St. Helens or something equivalently large that can release enough smoke.
Hmm.
I mean, we've already nuked a country once at the end of World War when we didn't necessarily have to. I mean, why wouldn't we do it to save everyone?
No,
What's a
no,
few
no, no.
million?
I mean,
Yeah,
hey, I'll gladly nuke Australia if it saves everyone else. I'm fine with it.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm just
So
wondering about it's
I
more of
expect
its
them to do that.
political viability being the issue, I imagine. Um,
There is no political viability for anything right now, other than little incremental steps. Um, so I expect like technology to sort of be not dumbed down, but like you get whatever the best laptop is now. That's the best you get for whatever so many years because they're gonna invest everything into uh, fixing the problem once it becomes so much of a problem that large numbers of people die from it.
I know that the political viability of these issues isn't necessarily like your field of expertise. It's the actual
Yeah.
technical side. How do you feel about carbon taxes? Do you think this is even close to being an effective way of addressing these issues, or is it just a cheap, facile pretense that does nothing to really fix anything?
This is where like my political little bit of political extremism comes in. I feel like the only way you're going to really do that is basically any company or organization or let's say somehow an individual is pumping out above a certain number, you just send military there and put a bullet in their head. Like that like you're dealing with extinction level event. Like people used to wall off cities and let the people with the bubonic plague and lepers just rot and die.
I am
That's
obligated
that's the way you stop something like
by the
that.
rules of YouTube. I am
Oh yes, me too.
obligated to remind everyone that what my dear guest speaker meant was in Minecraft. But
Yes, you
boy
might.
golly, does that sound
Yeah,
like a good idea?
you have to. They have to be game ended.
Yes, they have to be. They have to fall into the lava and lose
Yeah,
all of their accumulated items,
all their precious diamonds.
all their precious diamonds. For real though, hypothetically speaking, I don't think that any price is too great to pay. I mean, we're literally talking about the end of the world here. The main worry would be that the people who are producing the excess of carbon output would also be the people with the political and social capital to avoid any consequences for those actions.
Yeah, they would be, but if they're getting to the point where even they're worried, they don't really have any options left. I mean, if you're getting to the point where you really want to produce, or you really want to have some sort of carbon emission tax it would have to be extremely high to even make someone who, say, wants to make a bunch, say, who does power production or whatever, to make them that sort of afraid to not do it. Tax would have to be higher. There have to be some sort of threat of Minecraft violence. Like
Well,
you're not going to. They're the same people that control your government, well, not literally, but metaphorically control your government. Uh, the same people that, uh, not same people literally, but same class of people that get the big government contracts for weapon R&D and other R&D and other just production of items or literally control the stock market. If it gets to the point where they have to tell their own class of people that you must not do this, then that they've they've run out of the ability to offset it by just making the average person take shorter time in showers. My mom always said that Reagan said you have to turn off the AC during different times of the day to save the electricity and stuff like that, and she believed it. And so you run to a point where you can't offset it anymore with the common or the average person or person who makes even up to an engineer's salary. After a certain point, you've minimized that all you can. You have to go to the other group.
it's worth
And if it
pointing
gets
out.
to the
Oh, sorry. I just want to say it is worth pointing
yeah,
out, doomer as we like to be, that the wealth and complacency of the capitalist class is dependent on the ability for the economy to function properly. And the economy cannot function properly if the world is burning. So there are incentives, as
yeah,
comparatively meager as they may be, for even the wealthy, even the people producing the problems we're all suffering the consequences of, to get off their asses and do something about it and police one another.
yes, and they will do that, but only after like we get closer to our old age, because at that point there'll be no more ways to obfuscate or delay it, because at that point the sea levels will rise enough to damage all the coastal areas, and at that point they have to massively fund research initiatives, R&D to finish the designs for different scientific models and things to fix it. Just right now, it's more like basically we know there's a theoretical solution that we're okay with, and we're just gonna hope the engineers and scientists figure it out on their own. And if they do, great. If not, oh well, we got time. Um, Sort of as a sidetrack, um, a lot of the science, like the hardcore advanced theoretical science,
Hmm.
is often based off work that was done primarily in the 20s and 30s and so on and so forth. Most, so I'll give an example. Light was pretty much completely figured out around the 1930s, uh, thanks to the introduction of quantum mechanics and other stuff. Condensed matter physics pretty much solved, but the reason it was solved was because there was a big, almost like explosion of math that came out, of physics that came out, thanks to a few very intelligent people and a bunch of other intelligent people, but maybe not quite as intelligent as them, figuring out something. And now, at our point, we've kind of stabilized. Like we reached the equilibrium point where we solved just about everything with that level of math. Kind of when the Romans used their pseudo version of algebra or whatever, and they got to the point where they could do just about everything with it. We're getting to that point as well, but there's still quite a few advancements that could fix the problems.
I guess this kind of feels like it's it, right? Global warming, in regards to things that we have control over, global warming and nuclear apocalypse are like the two apocalyptic scenarios.
Yeah,
There doesn't, to my knowledge, like I don't think humanity. I guess like maybe some like like immunovirus that we can't that has like immunity to all antibiotics or something, maybe something like that. But I think for the most part, this is one of the two apocalyptic scenarios. You know,
yeah,
if we could actually like surpass this now, that would be. I mean, that'd be really cool, wouldn't it?
yeah. I don't think, even though I sort of sound doomery, I don't think it's as doomy as everyone sort of thinks. The probability for survival is still probably good as long as we don't enter a feedback loop of carbon. Even then, it can be more or less survived. It's just the quality of everyone's life. Excuse me. So like the meme comic where uh, like people with their phones or whatever, and then it flashes over to a burning city, a mom and it's her kid, and it's like, what was whatever you're like, when it was like it was amazing or whatever.
Yeah.
Basically, even if like all the bad things sort of happen, the planet is large enough and there's enough people so that in different areas, all with pretty much the same level of intelligence, and like there's academics in every country, so on and so forth, and there's welders in every country, there's nurses in every country, so on and so forth. You only need about like a little over 2 million people who aren't literally brothers and sisters or parents to survive, for the species to survive. And obviously, it's not going to get to that bad anyway, unless there is like literally something we can't stop. So it just, how would I phrase it? I guess what I would say is, assuming we don't get the breakthroughs and everything, we get to sort of LARP as people right before World War II when everything was really shitty, before it got even shittier, but then stopped being shitty. Like basically the Germans and the bread lines, where they had the photos of the kids playing with the German money like it was building blocks
Yeah,
because it
like
was
burning
that
it and stuff.
worthless.
Yeah, because it was completely
Yeah,
worthless.
you're gonna, if everything goes really tits up, then you get to live like that for a while until the scientific community figures out a solution and then it's implemented. As long as the planet doesn't warm beyond the ability for humans to live in, basically you survive. Whether that has to be in, say, a bunker situation or just really shitty environment or whatever.
Do
Uh,
you believe the average person should begin doomsday prepping?
no, you wouldn't be able to last. The amount of resources you would
Okay.
need, but also it wouldn't necessarily be that bad, and they're gonna have to store that food for decades before it reaches. If you're someone in America, I would say no. If you're somewhere in these third world countries, I would say you need to get out of there or find a way to make your area more stable. but at that point, you have bigger problems than sort of what we're talking about for, say, the average American. Things will get bad. They'll get better eventually. Um, it's going to be like almost like, obviously not to the same extent, but uh, sort of like, if everything goes really bad, then it'll kind of be like the last one third of a movie called The Day After, where it
Yeah.
was all about uh, what happens in this one area, I think of like Kansas or something, where there was a war, like nuclear war happened, and people were rationing stuff, and people were. It's like that, but without the fallout, basically, where you kind of start from not from square one, but from a small step above square one, and then you rebuild from there. But you just don't lose all the knowledge that we accumulated. And there are people in safer areas who have all the knowledge, and then you work together to fix the problem.
All right. I mean, that's not that's not worst
But
case scenario.
well, because I feel like the reason I don't feel like the worst case scenario ever happens is because I feel like it's just my opinion, but
Mhm.
due to the negative effects of climate change, a lot of the eco-fascism that you were talking about, I feel like they would just end up kind of killing themselves before you would reach the limit cycle, before you'd reach the feedback loop. Like the people in Africa, the people in India, the people in China, say, would just die due to the pollution before they would be able to output enough to
I'm worried
cross
about
over
the
that line.
so you're saying that the possibility of so you're saying that the
It,
negative
I'll phrase it
consequences.
this way.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No,
I
no,
feel
please.
like the negative consequences of polluting to the point that you reach the carbon feedback loop would end up killing enough billions of people that you would never actually reach it. Like
I've
all the
heard from
people in Asia and
people.
Africa die before they pollute enough to get to that point. It's
I
possible that they don't, but
I've
I feel
heard that
like
the carbon feedback loop is something that we could reach conceivably within a decade. Is it farther off than that?
I don't know. Chemistry isn't my special area of expertise. Basically, it's just about getting it to where everything just releases its carbon buildup, more or less. That's what they talk about. Uh, I'm not sure when you would have to do that. I just kind of hoping that you don't reach that point.
Where do you think people should move to?
Uh, like definitely not in desert areas or right next to coastlines. Um, but it kind of also due to the sort of unpredictability of climate. Uh, Predictable in that it gets bad, but unpredictable in that you don't know what areas would necessarily be best to live in. I would say you just sort of move inwards toward the middle of the country, basically. And on a side note, assuming we fix all these issues and everything goes well, the I wanted to also bring up a topic of water. Uh, in that people always complain that there's not enough water and other things like that.
Yeah.
Um, there is a solution to it. You can de-ionize, basically take the salt out of salt water.
Hmm.
It's just really energy inefficient. But if you had some sort of like authoritarian government, they could just order that the facilities be made along coastlines and then just order that electricity be output to it and then just run those all day and then problem solved for water
Any chance of
because
us
you
doing
just
that non-authoritarianly, do you think?
well there's no money in it.
Oh, right.
It's
Proletarian
not efficient.
revolution then?
It's yeah, it's an inefficient process.
It seems to
um
keep coming down to the fact of the matter that saving the world isn't particularly profitable.
yeah. Let's see, that's most I wanted to talk about. uh
If you want, we can do
oh
a
one
bit of a
more
Q&A section. I can just pull questions from chat.
Yeah, oh, one more thing before we do that.
Mhm.
um a lot of people talking about Mars or Moon, idea of like escaping to there. To be perfectly honest with you, the probability of survival would be better if you literally had a Fallout game sort of version of a bunker system, or literally a ocean base, because at least then you could go out and sort of scavenge for resources from cities or whatever, assuming like literally like a video game. Like that would be more, your probability of survival would be higher, because Mars has almost no oxygen, almost no water.
Yeah,
And
like
the reason it looks red is because most of its soil is literally like soil mixed with rust. That's why it's so red.
I don't know
It's
why
like
anyone
carbon
thinks
or
that
iron oxide.
transplanetary exploration and colonization is the solution here. Even worst case scenario, climate change Earth is still infinitely more hospitable
Yeah.
to human life than
Yeah.
fucking Mars is.
Well, I feel like that's why Elon Musk keeps thinking about it. I feel like he wants to. People are funding that because they want to escape or something.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like from a scientific perspective.
Here, let
All right,
me
let's go to Q&A.
yeah, let me pull the good shit from chat. Really quickly, chat. Here's the update. Have you been watching the stream?
Actually, no, because I stay with my family and they don't have the super highest internet. They just have whatever AT&T offers. So I don't have the stream open right now.
Gotcha. Probably for the best. All right,
Yeah.
chat. Throw up the good shit. I'm ignoring meme questions. What exactly will happen that will kill everyone if it... Wait. What exactly will happen that will kill everyone if it gets real bad, like plus 10 Celsius bad? I mean, a lot of things, I imagine. Do you want to take it away?
Yeah, it just becomes too hot to live on the surface. Basically, you'd have to either... You'd basically have to... You could survive if you lived in cave systems or underground, a certain level of distance. You wouldn't have to go super far deep underground, but you'd have to be underground basically your whole life, or you'd have to live in a almost like a old cartoon thing where it's like a big dome underwater, and then you would just have to sort of like inverse mine. By that I mean like scavenge above ground in the ruins of cities for electronics and other stuff, bring it down. Then you'd have to figure out basically Metro, the video game. You just live in the mine systems or
Don't make it sound too
train
good.
systems.
Metro was a pretty fun video game.
Yeah. But that would basically be the answer. You would either live underground, and if you can't manage that, then you would die. Like, or you go like to the very tips of the North and South Pole areas that might be habitable, maybe.
Gotcha. Yeah, and not to mention like water, I imagine would dry up. Fucking crops would no longer be able to survive. Like there'd be a whole probably like cascading effect of horrible things that would take
Yeah.
place if the temperature like went too fucking crazy.
Yeah, the air you breathe would be mostly water vapor at that point.
Nice.
Like you'd have more water in the air than
Oh god, the
oxygen.
mold. Oh, imagine the mold problems in the bathroom. Good lord.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let me see. I'm trying to find the questions that aren't memes or stupid. Is this conversation all within a capitalist framework? The framing of solutions has been pretty elitist. Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, we're talking pragmatically. If we want to talk about proletarian revolution, like world uniting together to solve these problems, then probably we'd be able to fix things relatively quickly and easily. We're talking mostly about like pragmatic solutions, which is what I care about, because we're not going to have a proletarian revolution anytime soon.
Yeah, I would say as far as pragmatic, what you need to do is you need to get like the large reason for why I did this, asked to do this, is I wanted to sort of get some information out to people that it can be different levels of bad, but basically you need to start now pressuring people really hard politically to just start picking, excuse me, just pick one way you want to go forward and just run with that. There's even if they say, even if let's say for whatever reason people are the older generation is afraid of nuclear, let's just say you can't convince them otherwise, doesn't matter, just build a bunch of wind and solar turbines, do whatever you can to make the policy change easier when it has to be made eventually.
Shostako, quick, this one I'm interested in. Shostako Lich donated this question. He provided a paper and said, Vosh, this research claims tackling fossil fuels before animal agriculture will actually accelerate greenhouse gas emissions. I'd be interested if our guest had heard of it before, and I'll provide you the link to the paper. I don't know if you're familiar with this specific research. Where's the fucking...
Are you emailing it to me or just sending it through Skype?
I just sent it over
Okay,
Skype. It just took me a second to figure out because I don't use Skype that often.
Hold on 1 second here.
He says the paper is cringe.
No,
I'm joking. I'm saying you're saying that. Don't,
okay. Okay. Okay, let me see. Okay, so basically they're just going over the fact that animal meat production at this scale is more or less unsustainable, just as much as energy production is. Well, yeah, that's also part of the problem. You got to deal with that as well. I guess most of the cow subspecies have to go away at that point.
Rip cows. They're really cute too.
Well, we still have the base species that they were bred from, so we can always make more.
It's so wild to think about. Do you agree with the premise? I assume that you're in favor of scaling back animal agriculture, if for no reason other than because it's horrible for the planet.
Yeah, you have to scale it back. You can't have massive production on the scale that we have. You've got to scale it down. Make it maybe a delicacy. Might be maybe more. This is going into like abstract political theory, but maybe sort of. I'm Catholic, so let's say you take sort of the different Catholic religious holidays and stuff. They actually spread pretty almost decently throughout the year. Make those days where like everyone eats sort of meat and stuff, like almost like a once a month delicacy, or sort of transition it downward to that point.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we're operating within capitalism, it makes sense that price incentives would be the way that you would de-incentivize like people from like consuming from unethical industries.
Yeah, you just price it out of the average person's affordability, and then you make something plant-based that's almost as good, so that they don't feel so bad.
Gotcha. All right, let me scroll through CAM. A few more questions. One person wants to ask how you feel about seasteading, building floating cities.
It's not that efficient, and I have a lot of wind resistance. Also, this is gonna sound weird, but if you wanted to do it, the best way would be to have an asteroid or something way bigger than the space station, but way smaller than the moon. Get it into a stable orbit around the Earth, and then basically have almost like a giant string attaching that to a city, and then the city just moves around the Earth. At the orbit of it. That would be the only way you do it.
That sounds so sci-fi to me that actually sounds impossible. Is that even within the realm of possibility?
Maybe, I'm not sure what sort of material you would have to use for the tethering cable, but that's the only way you would have a floating city, because then you're not. The problem with the idea of a floating city is you're wasting massive amounts of energy to make it levitate.
I'm sorry. I should clarify. By floating, I meant floating on the ocean.
Oh, on the ocean. Okay, I thought you meant in the sky. Okay, so floating on the ocean, I guess you could do it. You just take the same idea behind oil rigs and just like I guess it'd be like Metal Gear Solid 5. You just have different areas connecting together. You could do that. I don't know necessarily what you would want to do with that though.
Because if the ice caps melt, they would be able to just ride the wave.
Okay. You probably don't want to have it floating around because you could go to unstable areas where waves are very large. You would want to have it connected to the soil beneath on the bottom of the ocean. No matter where you place it, you want to have it kind of anchored down so it's not going out. Because if you go far enough into the ocean, you can get pretty big waves that just only exist over there, and then they get smaller as they get near the surface, near the continents.
Hmm.
Like you don't want to. I guess you could have them floating, but you don't want to have them floating like in the area where they go for crab fishing up by Alaska. Those waves are massive. You want it in an area that has low amounts of waves, something not crazy.
Chat is asking, have you heard of or studied using compressed air as a method of energy storage?
I've heard of compressed air for the idea of alternative to gasoline, where you just use compressed air to turn the axle. I haven't heard of it for energy storage. It'd be interesting to see.
I mean, I guess it makes sense conceptually, right? You would use energy to store that air, and then later the compressed air could be released to. I mean, I don't know the actual physics. It would probably be inefficient,
Um,
right?
I don't know how efficient it could be, but the reason you store something in say hydrogen is you're storing like electrons in it. Basically, you're making it electropositive or negative, one or the other, and then you do a chemical reaction to release all that electricity and stuff like that. If you're storing it in compressed air, it sounds like what you're doing is you're storing it based on pressure. So you make it really, really pressurized. When you store the energy, you make it highly pressurized. Then when you release energy, pressure goes down. And then you store energy, pressure goes up. But I don't know. Uh, Probably not the best idea, maybe. Or maybe it is. I don't know. I'd have to look at it.
Maybe not, but it's fun to think about. Have you heard of
Yeah.
something called ocean acidification?
Yes. That's a pretty big problem.
Uh oh.
Um,
I don't know what this is.
Not enough of the right ratio of oxygen and other things in the water for the fish to breathe, so they all choke to death.
Are we all gonna die?
Uh, you probably live without. I don't know, maybe. But
Gotcha.
I mean, we all have finite lifespans. But
That is true. Have you heard of something called thorium reactors?
yes, those are actually very old. If I'm not mistaken. Hold
The
on.
only thing I know about thorium is that it's a fantasy metal in World of Warcraft. Does it go beyond that?
Oh, it is a real metal in the real world.
Oh.
Uh,
Well, in World of
let's.
Warcraft, it does more damage than steel and gold weapons. So I don't know. I don't know how
All
that
right.
translates.
All right. The concept of using thorium as a nuclear fuel was proposed in 1942 by a bunch of people. Um, let's see. Benefits: three times as abundant as uranium, so you can power it with just that for a long time. Less amount of refining is required because it's already closer to the value you need it to be. Can't really make nuclear bombs out of them is one of the benefits. Less nuclear waste. Long-term low toxicity. It seems like it's basically a nicer version of uranium.
Is there a
Uh,
problem with its implementation?
uh, let's see. Looks like, well, the first two are just matters of investment, so that's not really a problem. You got to start. It's a slow process to begin the refinement or for the activation. But once you start doing like a factory, it's that doesn't matter anymore. You just build more factories to offset the speed. And the other one is basically because back in the 40s they wanted to make weapons, so they didn't really look at thorium much. So we have to do R&D to get it up to standards for energy production. And the actual only real problem it could have is a byproduct of when they're irradiated for use in reactors. I'd have to look at this more specifically, but it seems like their byproduct under a certain part of their life cycle is uranium 232, which emits a lot of gamma rays.
Okay, gotcha. So complicated and technical.
Yeah, technical.
Two questions I found that I'm interested in. One, how does geothermal energy track as a renewable resource?
Okay. It's good. The problem is we're actually not that good at digging deep into the earth. I think the deepest we've gone is like less than 10 miles deep. Uh, Basically, once you go past the part of the earth that even is like the earth is almost like an onion, where top layers are where we stand on, and even underneath the ocean is that same top layer. It just has a big shield, a big amount of lots of water on top of it, but it's still the same layer. Then you go beneath that, and then you get to something called the mantle, or I think it's called that, where the continents, all the land that's we stand on, is on that, and then though that basically floats on liquid rock, and then it further in you get to like a iron nickel core that spins, and that's what creates the Earth's magnetic field. Basically, if you could dig deep enough and have some sort of pressure release valve, you'd have an infinite, a functionally, basically an infinite amount of hot, hot air to boil as much water as you want to spin a turbine. Problem is digging that deep. That's why usually geothermal plants are located near volcanoes. They're like a way to cheat to get near that
Because it
hot.
gets closer to the surface.
Because basically you have a hole that already is made where the lava is right next to you.
But do you feel that this is a field of an avenue of development that if several breakthroughs are made, this conceivably could be like a pretty big solution?
It could be for if you could figure out a way to um, harness a volcano without making it erupt. That'd be useful. It's going to be a long time before we figure out a way to dig very deep into the crust. That's a long way. But being able to harness the power of a volcano without activating it would be pretty good. I don't know. People really lost lost the sort of the want to go in that direction. There isn't as much research in it.
Gotcha. And also, what do you feel about topsoil erosion? Do you have much information on that, like the threat it poses, what we need to do about it?
I don't, but a lot of these issues are interconnected. So the ocean toxicity, the topsoil, those are basically functions of humans not living at the level of sustainability we should. Basically, topsoil erosion usually happens because we overfarm too much and don't do correct crop rotation. And even when you do crop rotation, all you're doing is eroding the soil slower. And the ocean toxicity is because we're warming the planet and algae is growing more, yada yada yada.
Right.
Basically, we get our act together, and those problems slowly fix themselves.
Gotcha. All right. Are there any, since we've been going for over an hour and a half now, are there any big pointers that you'd like to hit on before I spend 10 minutes thanking and congratulating you for dedicating time to educating us?
Just I just want people my age and younger to just sort of maybe not collectively, but say pick. Okay, we want wind, solar, and nuclear, and we're going to keep telling our parents and our grandparents and our friends and stuff, these are the fuels of these are the power production of the future. Let's all, like, I guess, make it seem as good as nice as possible, so that, say, when the older millennials come into power, or maybe even if you convince enough of the older generations like the boomers and so on to actually agree with that, it makes it easier and faster to get legislation pushed that would allow you to do it in a capitalist sense. Because I don't see any massive revolution happening anytime soon. So you have to find a way to make it easier, so that, to convince the political systems that exist to make these decisions sooner rather than later.
Gotcha. Hey, man, thank you so much for dedicating your time and expertise to sharing this information with us. I really, really appreciate it. Are there any socials you'd like to shout out?
No, I don't really like to. I don't engage much on the internet. I just play Xbox and PC games, and that's about it.
Hell yeah.
I'm good.
Don't make games like they used to. Am I right, brother?
See, the actual reason everything went bad was because we stopped using cartridges.
True. Those quick loading times, man. I miss them. Hey,
Go.
thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Have a nice day.
Don't be a stranger in emails, okay?
All right, goodbye.
Bye. What a fancy pants learned man. Only a year older than me and going after a PhD. Let's go over donos, huh? Even though a lot of them are going to be questions for him and not me, because I never said donate for questions. I said chat ask questions, so I never guaranteed people who donated would be able to ask a question. This actually looks like a pretty cool earth drawing I did, but I'm going to delete it now because the Zen Buddhist monastic tradition is to detach yourself from material concerns.